When Claire invited me to her company's annual gala, I didn't think much of it. She framed it as a casual obligation, insisting it would be boring business talk, and that I didn't need to come. But something in her tone struck me as off, like she wasn't discouraging me out of concern for my comfort, but out of fear of how my presence might change things. That's what made me insist. "I'll come," I told her with a smile. "After all, I am your husband." She hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, before forcing a bright smile. "Of course," she said, but her eyes betrayed unease. The night of the gala, I understood why. As we entered the glittering ballroom, filled with polished executives and their partners, Claire clung to my arm tightly, almost as if guiding me away from certain people. She introduced me to a few colleagues, but always in vague terms. "This is Mark," she said once, without mentioning the word husband. When I extended my hand and added, "Her husband," I caught the flicker of irritation cross her face. As the evening wore on, I noticed how she seemed restless whenever we approached a particular group. She kept steering me toward the buffet, the bar, anywhere but that circle of sharply dressed men at the center of the room. Curiosity tugged at me, but I stayed patient, observing. Then it happened. One of the men, tall and confident, spotted us across the room and approached with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Claire," he said warmly, "aren't you going to introduce me to your guest?" Guest. The word cut sharper than it should have. Claire stammered, but I extended my hand. "Mark. Her husband." The man blinked, then let out a low whistle. "Husband, huh? Well, Mark, any chance you're available for a career change? We could use someone with your confidence on our team." The tension that rippled through the group after that simple question was like a glass shattering. Silent but impossible to ignore. Claire's face drained of color. And I knew, right then, that the night was about to unravel. The moment her boss made that comment, the air around us seemed to thicken. Claire's forced smile wavered as she shot him a sharp look, the kind you give someone who's said too much. But the damage was already done. A murmur rippled through the group, and I noticed a few raised eyebrows from her coworkers. I chuckled lightly, trying to diffuse the tension. "I appreciate the offer," I said smoothly, "but I'm happy where I am." My tone was calm, but my eyes never left Claire's. She avoided my gaze, sipping her champagne a little too quickly. Her boss, Richard, seemed amused by her discomfort. "Well," he said with a smirk, "you should know, Claire here has spoken quite a lot about her independent life. Some of us didn't even realize she was married." His words hung heavy in the air, and suddenly everything made sense. Claire hadn't been downplaying me out of shyness. She'd been deliberately hiding the fact that she was married. The realization stung, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I turned to Richard, my voice steady. "Funny, she talks a lot about her job at home. I've always been proud of her." My words were chosen carefully, warm on the surface, but edged with a truth Claire couldn't escape. The group dispersed shortly after, but the tension didn't. Claire grabbed my arm, her nails digging in as she whispered through clenched teeth. "Why did you have to say that?" "Say what?" I asked, feigning innocence. "That I'm your husband? Isn't that the truth?" Her eyes flashed with anger, but beneath it I caught a flicker of panic. She knew her secret was slipping. For the rest of the night, I noticed how her behavior shifted. She laughed a little too loudly at conversations, kept her distance from me, and avoided Richard's gaze. But no matter how hard she tried, the whispers had already started. I could see the curious glances, the subtle smirks. Claire had built an image for herself at work, an image where I didn't exist. And now, with just one introduction, that carefully constructed illusion had begun to crack. By the time we left the party, Claire's mask was crumbling. She didn't speak a word as we drove home, her knuckles white against the steering wheel. I sat in silence, staring out the window, my mind replaying every detail of the evening. The way she introduced me, the way Richard smirked, the way her coworkers whispered when the truth slipped out. Finally she broke. "You embarrassed me tonight," she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut through the dark. I turned to her slowly. "Embarrassed you? For telling the truth?" My tone was calm, almost too calm, and that seemed to irritate her even more. "You don't understand," she said, her voice cracking just slightly. "Work is different. Relationships complicate things. People judge. I let out a quiet laugh. So your solution was to erase me? Pretend I didn't exist. She didn't answer, and in that silence, I realized the gravity of what had happened. This wasn't just about a party or an awkward comment. This was about respect, or rather, the lack of it. The next morning, while she was in the shower, I opened her laptop. She always left it on the counter, unlocked, as if she had nothing to hide. But last night had changed everything. I needed answers. Emails, messages, calendar invites, it was all there. Richard's name came up more times than I could count. Late-night meetings, urgent dinners, business trips that suddenly made more sense. My chest tightened as the puzzle pieces fit together. She hadn't just erased me from her work life. She had been rewriting her entire story, positioning herself as single, independent, available. When she walked out of the bathroom, towel wrapped around her hair, she froze at the sight of me sitting with her laptop open. Care to explain this? I asked, turning the screen toward her. Her eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. It's just work, she stammered. No, Claire, I said firmly. Work doesn't require pretending your husband doesn't exist. Work doesn't require hiding me. And work doesn't explain why your boss thinks you're available. She opened her mouth to speak, but no excuse came out. The silence between us said more than words ever could. I closed the laptop and stood, the weight of the truth pressing heavily on my chest. You've built a life at work where I don't exist, I said, my voice low but steady. And now I see why. You weren't protecting your career. You were protecting an image. An image that doesn't include me. Her face went pale. It's not what you think, she whispered, but even she didn't believe her own words. I shook my head slowly. Claire, you called me your roommate in front of strangers. Do you know what that felt like? To watch the woman I married laugh and flirt like I was nothing more than a temporary housemate. My voice cracked at the edges, but I didn't hold back. You didn't just humiliate me, you erased me. Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't wait for them to fall. I grabbed my coat and keys. I won't stay where I'm not respected, I said, turning toward the door. Where are you going? She asked, her voice trembling. Somewhere I still exist, I replied. The click of the door behind me felt like the final punctuation mark on a chapter one never wanted to write. In the days that followed, I didn't answer her texts. I didn't return her calls. Instead, I focused on reclaiming the pieces of myself I'd lost in her shadow. Friends who had been pushed aside, hobbies I'd abandoned, even my own quiet peace. All of it came rushing back once I walked away. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about making her pay. It was about freedom. She had tried to bury me under her lies, her image, her ambition. But in the end, the only thing she buried was her own relationship. Weeks later, word reached me through a mutual friend. Richard had moved on to another protégé, and Claire was left behind, scrambling to rebuild. Her backup plan had collapsed the moment I refused to play along. And as for me, I didn't just leave the party that night. I left the role of being invisible. I left the man who tolerated being hidden. And in doing so, I found something far greater than her approval. I found myself again.